I just added another good talk I found on the topic of Satan's little season or Satan's short season. And I'll briefly talk about that topic as a whole here, but I actually want to focus on the fact that this last video I added, I believe the title is Satan's Little Season Mic Drop. The person quoted Paul, the false apostle Paul, to support the theory that we're in Satan's little season. But as should be expected, if you know who he really is, that verse that he quoted, or the verses that he quoted, contained toxic content. And this is how it goes with all of his letters altogether. You can point to some good content, but if you're just focusing on that and ignoring the toxic content, you're being susceptible to the classic design of propaganda. Like, that is how propaganda is designed. It's, what I have called before propaganda sandwich is the classic recipe. You have some nice looking content on the outside, which you can call the bread, and then you slip in something completely toxic that undermines everything else. And that's what Paul's letters do overall, right? Because the toxic content is so bad, right? The doctrine on amoral blood power atonement, forgetting about the greatest commandments, the doctrine on human depravity, right? Original sin, and his blatant endorsement of slavery, right? On and on. These being, you know, the worst of the worst. It's so bad that if you take that with the other, overall, the effect is very negative. Overall, it's steering you away from the true gospel of Jesus, of Yeshua. So, in the talk that I added on Satan's little season, he quoted 1 Corinthians. 1 Corinthians 7:29 in particular is what I want to draw attention to. So that verse goes, but this I say, brethren, the time is short remaining. They that have wives should act as if they have none. Right? And then he goes on to say some other things, but that is easily glossed over, right? They that have wives should act as if they have none. How does that make any sense in whichever eschatology, right? Whether it's the second coming of Yeshua prior to the millennial kingdom, or if it's little season eschatology where we're awaiting the final judgment at the end of this season of great deception. Like I've said in previous talks, the main moral teaching of Yeshua, the main teaching on salvation, is to follow his commandments, which he clarified are the greatest commandments, which are to love God, others, and ourselves, right? So here we have Paul in what could be taken as an otherwise, truthful message of something concerning the return of Yeshua, inserting this toxic statement that men that have wives should act as though they don't have any, right? Well, how is a man supposed to treat his wife? Lovingly, right? So it's an underhanded, insidious teaching against the main teaching of Yeshua, which is to be loving, right? And this is easily missed, I think, over and over and over again. It's just these underhanded, toxic, you could say, subliminal messages dropped by Paul that totally go against, it's an anti-Christ message. And if you were to just focus on this one alone, I'm sure Paul and his Christian would think I'm overreacting and somehow, misunderstanding him, right? But it's just on and on with Paul with these messages against keeping the commandments, against truly repenting, right? I mean, it's well known that he emphasizes just faith over works. And what form of faith? Faith in blood power, right? Faith in the blood shed by an innocent person who was tortured to death to be your ticket to heaven, right? Which is not at all what Yeshua taught, right? And has no moral content whatsoever, right? It's amoral, it's satanic, this idea that innocent bloodshed is your ticket to heaven. Right? Yeshua actually said he came to abolish the sacrifices, not only of the animals, but the whole theology, the whole soteriology of this crazy idea that killing an innocent animal or killing an innocent person somehow is empowering to you, right? Like that is straight satanic. Another verse by Paul in that same chapter, 1 Corinthians 7, verses 8 through 9, he says, "To the unmarried and the widows I say, it is good for them to remain single, as I am. But if they cannot exercise self-control, let them marry." So it's good for the unmarried to stay unmarried? Well, we all start out unmarried, right? So, I mean, if you were to follow that, technically, right, no one would ever get married. And then saying, if you do get married, well, it's just you not exercising your self-control, right? So he's demonizing the marriage, right, as if it's just this expression of craving, which is obviously false. I mean, what what demonstrates craving more? Just living a promiscuous life where you're having like tons of partners, or having one? Obviously, the marriage is less an expression of craving, I'd say. So it's just this anti-love nonsense over and over and over again that is easily missed. So I thought I'd point it out here. Now, the topic of Satan's short season deserves a longer talk, a longer analysis, but I would refer you to that playlist that I put together that has a lot of good content. Not all of the videos in there agree with each other 100%. People are theorizing, putting in their own perspectives and opinions, but overall, those videos that I chose have a lot of good content, good truth nuggets, so to speak. But the basic support for the theory are the words of Yeshua himself, right? When he's talking to the people of that generation and saying that they were going to see him, before they die. They won't taste death before seeing him. The verse saying that even those that pierced him, right, the Roman soldiers that crucified him, are going to see his second coming. Right? There's a lot of content like these videos, a lot of verses, those in particular, that show that you pretty much have to straight up ignore Jesus you have to ignore Yeshua to think that his second coming happening around that time, around what we'd say is 70 AD, is a wild idea. It fits exactly what he was saying. And then you look into the history, and people would say, well, where's the historical proof? There's no historical evidence that there was actually a millennial reign. But actually there is, and you can see that there was an extremely active agenda to destroy that evidence, the architecture in particular. These amazing buildings and churches, which they say have, antiquitech, which I like is a cool term, meaning technology from antiquity, right? The precision of the precision and beauty and skill level of these um, these buildings being beyond what people were capable of at the time, and also when you look at our current official history, even it just doesn't even make sense concerning like population quantity, right? Like a town of a few hundred people, and then there's this one, you know, incredible cathedral just standing alone that doesn't fit in. Again, I'm not doing it justice here as far as like specific examples, but those specific examples are given in those videos. But just to give a brief off the cuff, reasoning as to why it actually makes sense. And then on top of that, this being a season of the Satan's little season being a season of great deception. Well, I mean, that is the hallmark of like everything coming from major institutions, whether they're political, education, academia, medical, like everything is completely backwards, right? So it would make sense that these institutions at the top are actually run by the enemy himself. And, those institutions, of course, including the religious, which, champion the false apostle Paul as the supposed faith of Yeshua, the Messiah, right? When it's actually against what he taught and leading believers to go in the opposite direction, right? That would be the worst deception of all, right? So that would be a top priority, and it makes sense then why the church has been so uh, heavily infiltrated, heavily, so severely hijacked as it has been. All right, well, I hope you found this of interest, and yeah, definitely check out the videos on that playlist, and let me know what you think of them. Thanks for listening.